Somebody who's experienced firsthand just how disillusioned and fed up voters are with mainstream politics is the former UK Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. In 2010, he helped Conservative David Cameron form government by taking his Liberal Democrat Party into coalition. But at the next election, Nick Clegg paid dearly, losing his party leadership and a swag of seats when his base considered he'd sold out. Nick Clegg has just written a book called Politics Between the Extremes about his experience and why politics is broken. He joined me from London. Nick Clegg, thanks for being with us. When we look around the world at Western democracies, it's the US that's very much in the spotlight at the moment. Why is the politics so volatile?
I think there are a bunch of reasons. I mean, some of them are quite long-standing ones. You know, we no longer live in a world of the Cold War where, you know, the world was divided neatly and rigidly into the communist camp versus the capitalist camp, you know, East versus West. In other words, we inhabit a much more ideologically fluid world. But I think the biggest proximate, sort of the nearest term reason why there is such fluidity and volatility is because of what happened in 2008. I think the kind of implosion in the financial system across much, if not all, of the developed world has left, you know, millions of our fellow citizens, particularly those on low incomes, understandably feeling really enraged and disempowered because, you know, things happened which had nothing to do with them, and yet they're still picking up the pieces. They're still paying the cost. You know, their pay hasn't gone up for 8 years. I don't know, they find it difficult to get their kids onto the property ladder. They're working longer hours for the same pay. So I think that sense that kind of other people have messed up, and yet millions of kind of ordinary folk are suffering is a cocktail that has been going on for some time now, which of course allows populists on both the right and the left to successfully promote simplistic answers to what are often very complex problems.
So why have the middle ground politicians not found a way to respond to that?
I think partly because, you know, it's very difficult for centrist, moderate politicians, and I count myself amongst those who believe in reason, in evidence, in compromise, in being open and kind of grown up about the complexity of the things we deal with. It's very difficult if you have that kind of mindset to compete with the kind of pungent ferocity of, you know, Donald Trump, who says all your problems will be solved by building a wall, or here in the UK, you know, the Brexiteers who said all your problems will be solved by if we just pull out of the European Union, or a Scottish nationalist in Scotland saying all the problems will be solved if you just blame it on the English. You know, populists give a very seductive simplicity, if you like, to people's kind of anger, and give very clear, if in my view misleading answers to what people are feeling frustrated about, whereas moderates or centre ground politicians kind of are a little bit stuck in the weeds with all the complexity of things, and that doesn't kind of cut through when people just want to hear a big simple answer to many of the things that they find frustrating about the modern world.
How can the moderate politics of reason compete with the politics of raging grievance, as you put it in your book? How can a more moderate style of politics make a comeback?
Well, I think partly we need to kind of reassert, how can I put it, the emotional value of moderation. I mean, you know, being moderate is not some sort of insipid, pastel-coloured, neither one thing nor the other kind of politics. It is, in my view, the best way in mature democracies to deliver the best prosperity and security for the largest number of people in our society. And I just kind of think we need to be a bit more self-confident. I'll give you an example. It always enrages me the way that the populists, particularly on the right, somehow kind of assume that they're the only patriots, that all their kind of nationalism and chauvinism and all their anger is kind of the true expression of patriotism. I live in a country, the UK, where liberalism and kind of science and evidence and open debate, these are profoundly British values rooted right back in our history. And it enrages me that the kind of populists are claiming the Union Jack for themselves. So, you know, that's just one example of where us moderate politicians need to be a little more immoderate in the way that we kind of assert our own values.
You took the Liberal Democrats into coalition with David Cameron's Tories, and you took a voter backlash for that ultimately. There are some parallels to Australia where a few years ago the minority Labor government went into coalition with the Greens and some independents, and they also suffered a backlash. Voters say they want politicians to work together, but do they really?
Yeah, you just, in a nutshell, said the problem. The problem is that voters quite understandably say, oh, can't you politicians stop arguing and stop throwing rocks at each other and stop all this yaboo nonsense? And then the moment we do that, they say, oh, it's outrageous. Every compromise is immediately branded as a betrayal. And that's certainly, I think, the case in political systems such as Australia's and the UK's, where we're not really used to that kind of, cross-party working and pluralism. That does happen in particularly coalition systems in Europe much more regularly. But for us, that kind of, full-blooded, one lot wins and the other one is completely vanquished, that's what we're more used to. So maybe we need to try it a few more times, certainly in the UK, before people get used to the idea that compromise in politics is not always a bad thing.
The former British Prime Minister Tony Blair once said that the irony in politics is that you start at your most popular and your least capable, and you end at your least popular and your most capable. Yeah. Very astute quote, isn't it? And probably not much that can be done about that.
No, he's dead right. I mean, I've talked to him about it. It's just one of the great ironies in life, particularly in politics, and particularly now in politics, where people rise and fall kind of much more abruptly than used to be the case. People are sort of put up on a pedestal the next moment and kind of roundly vilified by everyone the next. And he's right. And I certainly found this myself. Kind of at the beginning, you have more popularity but less experience. And by the end, when you've grown a much thicker skin and you've learned from your mistakes and you're much better at what you're doing, you're at your least popular.
Well, failure in politics plays out so publicly. Does losing an election or a leadership position feel as bad as it looks?
I wouldn't recommend it to the faint-hearted. I mean, it's not something you want to do too often. But on the other hand, I kind of think, most politicians, and certainly I include myself in this, I mean, if you get to the top or near the top of the tree, it's a bruising thing. It really is. And you live by the sword and you die by the sword. And I just don't think there's any point even starting in politics if what you want is endless sort of compliments and sort of bouquets of praise. It doesn't work like that. And certainly not these days. I still think politics is a worthwhile vocation, but it's become a lot more volatile. In many ways, it's become much rougher.
Nick Clegg, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.